I'm Natalie Johnson, 33 years old, and I had no idea that the one thing I worked hardest for would turn into the battleground for a fight I never wanted. I was standing outside my apartment building with a welcome basket in one hand and a folder of signed lease agreements in the other, feeling proud and prepared. Elijah and Isabella, the tenants I'd carefully chosen, stood beside me chatting about commute times and nearby coffee shops. We were supposed to be walking into a clean, quiet space where they'd start their next chapter. But the moment my key turned, the door swung open before I touched it. My sister Vanessa was already on the couch, her fiancé in the kitchen, like they belonged there. Before I go any further, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to draw a line even when it hurt. I grew up on the outskirts of Chicago in a modest neighborhood where people mowed their own lawns and waved to neighbors from porches. My mother Diane raised my sister Vanessa and me after our dad took a job out of state. We were taught to be polite, hardworking, and never take more than what was ours. At least that's what I held on to. Vanessa, 5 years younger, seemed to live by a different set of rules. From an early age, she'd borrow things without asking, close notebooks, even the cash I'd earned babysitting, and somehow it always became my fault for not sharing. When I brought it up, my mom would say things like, "She looks up to you, Natalie. Be the bigger person." So I became the bigger person. Quietly. By high school, I had 2 part-time jobs and a carefully folded envelope of college savings hidden in the back of my closet. Vanessa got a new iPhone for her birthday and custom invitations for a Sweet 16 I wasn't allowed to plan. When I left for college, I brought with me a scholarship, a few secondhand sweaters, and a habit of keeping things to myself. I worked through school, never asked for help, and graduated with barely any debt. Meanwhile, Vanessa attended a private university our mom paid for in full. That difference, that silent imbalance, followed us into adulthood, like an invisible weight I carried alone. After college, I got a job in banking. The hours were long, the stress constant, but the pay was steady. I lived with roommates and packed my lunch every day. No vacations, no splurges. Just a goal to someday buy a place that was mine. And 3 years ago, I did it. A 2-bedroom in a mid-rise downtown, not flashy but safe, warm mine. I painted the walls myself, chose each piece of furniture carefully, and filled the space with light and quiet. For once, I wasn't someone's backup plan. I was home. 6 months ago, I left banking to move into financial planning. The new work felt better, more human, but it came with a temporary pay cut. So I made a plan, rent out my apartment for a year, stay with my friend Zoe, and use the extra income to build a cushion while I settled into the new job. I was careful with every step: interviews, background checks, deposit payments. Elijah and Isabella were thoughtful, respectful, and grateful. The kind of tenants any landlord would hope for. I didn't mention my plans to my mom or Vanessa. It just seemed easier that way. I thought I had covered everything until that Saturday morning when we stepped into the hallway and saw my front door slightly ajar. I hesitated. Maybe I'd forgotten to lock it during my last walkthrough. But then I heard voices. Inside my apartment, Vanessa was curled up on my sofa like it had always been hers. Trevor waved from the kitchen holding my favorite coffee mug. Behind me, Elijah and Isabella stood frozen. My heart dropped before a single word was spoken. Vanessa didn't even stand up when I walked in. She looked up from her phone and said, "Oh, hey, Mom. Said we could stay here while you're at Zoe's." Trevor gave me a sheepish smile from across the kitchen island, still holding my favorite mug like it was his. I stood there without speaking, unable to make sense of the scene. Behind me, Elijah and Isabella hovered quietly in the hallway, holding their folder and house keys, both of them waiting for me to explain something that made no sense. I turned around and asked them to give me a moment. They nodded, stepping back into the hallway with uncertain smiles. I shut the door gently and looked at Vanessa again. "You're not supposed to be here. How did you even get in?" She didn't flinch. "Mom gave me her spare key. She said you were staying with Zoe for a while and that we could use the place while we save for the wedding." Her tone was casual, like she was talking about borrowing a casserole dish. I glanced at the stack of suitcases near the wall, then back at Trevor. "So you just moved in?" He shrugged and said, "We were told it was okay. Vanessa said you wouldn't mind." My heart was pounding now, but I kept my voice steady. "This isn't a misunderstanding. I have tenants moving in today. They've signed a lease. They've paid. This is their apartment now for the next year." Vanessa's smile wavered for the first time. "What? No, that can't be right. Mom said I cut her off. Mom doesn't own this apartment. I do." Vanessa sat up straighter. "She said it would be empty. That you were staying with Zoe." I didn't respond. I just walked to the door, opened it, and apologized to Elijah and Isabella again. "There's been a situation with my family," I said quietly. "Would you mind waiting just a little longer?" They agreed, though. I could see concern in their faces. I closed the door behind me and faced my sister and Trevor again. "You need to leave. I'm serious." "This is not a discussion." Vanessa's voice rose. "We've already moved our stuff in. Our lease ended. We don't have another place to go." I nodded slowly. "That's not my fault. You should have asked me directly before assuming you could stay here." Trevor opened his mouth, then closed it again. Vanessa whipped out her phone and said, "I'll call Mom. She'll explain." I let her. While she dialed, I stepped back into the hallway and told Elijah and Isabella I'd update them shortly. Isabella asked gently, "Will we still be able to move in today?" I nodded. "Yes, you will. Just give me a few minutes." When I came back inside, Vanessa had her phone on speaker. My mother's voice filled the room. "Natalie, I thought you weren't using the place. You said you were staying with Zoe and Vanessa, and Trevor needed a spot while saving for their wedding. I didn't think it would be a big deal." I took a breath and answered, "You had no right. I never said the apartment would be empty. I have tenants here, today." There was a long pause before she replied, "Well, I think family should come first. Vanessa needs a place to stay, and you're always so responsible. You can find other tenants later." I ended the call. I didn't trust myself to say what I was thinking with Elijah and Isabella waiting outside. Vanessa looked stunned. "I can't believe you're choosing strangers over your sister." I shook my head. "You made assumptions. You didn't ask. You can't stay here." She folded her arms. "We're not leaving." Trevor glanced at her, then looked at the floor. I said nothing. I just turned and walked into my bedroom. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it. My phone buzzed another message from my mother. "Call me. We need to talk about this like adults." I stared at the screen for a moment, then called her back. She picked up immediately. "Natalie, I don't understand why you're being so difficult. They're family. It's your sister." I sat down on the edge of the bed. "You gave them permission to live in my apartment. Did it ever occur to you to ask me first? Or maybe offer your own place?" "My condo is too small," she said sharply. "Besides, you're not even using your apartment right now. You're staying with Zoe." I closed my eyes. "Because I'm renting it out. That income is part of my financial plan for the year. This isn't about convenience, it's about responsibility." Her voice dropped into that disappointed tone I knew too well. "You always think about money first. Family should be the priority." I didn't answer right away. When I finally spoke, I said, "You always make excuses for Vanessa. You always have. You told her she could stay here because you assumed I'd bend." Again. She went quiet. I could hear her breathing on the other end, but she said nothing. I added, "I'm not doing that anymore." When I stepped out of the bedroom, Trevor was waiting just outside the door. I wanted to say he started quietly, "This wasn't my idea. Vanessa said your mom had cleared it. I suggested we call you, but she said it was fine. I nodded. Thank you for telling me. But you still can't stay. He didn't argue. I'll talk to her. Back in the living room, Vanessa was on the phone again. Yes, Mom. She's being completely unreasonable. Okay. You're coming. Good. She hung up and looked at me. Mom's on her way. She'll help sort this out. I didn't say anything. I just walked to the front door and invited Elijah and Isabella inside. They stepped in carefully, glancing between me and Vanessa. I kept my voice calm. I'm very sorry for the confusion. We'll still move forward as planned. Please feel free to take a look around while I finish resolving things. Vanessa laughed. You're really going to pretend like this is normal. They're not moving in. We're already here. Isabella looked at Elijah, who gave her a slight shake of the head. She stepped forward. Maybe we should come back later. I felt my heart sink. Please stay. I just need to make one more call. I stepped out into the hallway and dialed Hannah. When she picked up, I got straight to the point. Hannah, I need legal advice. My sister and her fiancé moved into my apartment without permission. My mom gave them a spare key. I have signed tenants waiting to move in today. What are my rights? Her answer was swift. You're the legal owner. Your sister is trespassing. Even if your mom gave her a key, it doesn't matter. Only you have authority over who lives there. I felt a wave of relief. And my tenants? I asked. They have the right to move in as scheduled. If you don't deliver the property, they could sue for damages, housing costs, or breach of contract. I nodded. Okay. What should I do now? Tell them to leave, she said simply. If they won't, call the police. After I hung up, I called building management. Mr. Peters said he'd be there shortly. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked back inside. Vanessa and Trevor were still sitting on the couch. Elijah and Isabella stood by the kitchen, clearly uncomfortable. I looked around the room and said, I just spoke to my attorney. You're trespassing. If you don't leave, I will involve the authorities. Vanessa rolled her eyes. We're your family, not criminals. You're in my home without permission, I said. I have tenants. They are moving in today. Trevor stood up. Maybe we should just go. Vanessa glared at him. We gave up our lease. Where exactly do you expect us to go? Before I could answer, a knock at the door signaled Mr. Peters' arrival. He greeted me with a nod, then surveyed the room. I'll need to see IDs, please. He listened to my explanation, then turned to Vanessa and Trevor. Miss Johnson is the legal owner. If you're here without her consent, you are trespassing. She has the right to have you removed. Vanessa's face turned red. You can't be serious. She can call the police, he said plainly, and if you don't leave, she will. The front door opened again. My mother had arrived. My mother walked in briskly, her purse still hanging from her elbow, eyes scanning the room like she already knew what had happened. She barely glanced at me before turning to Mr. Peters with a practiced smile. I think there's been a little confusion, she said. This is all just a family misunderstanding. It's nothing serious. Mr. Peters stood calmly, hands clasped in front of him. Ma'am, this is a property issue. Miss Johnson is the legal owner. She has asked your daughter and her fiancé to vacate the apartment. That's not a family discussion. It's a matter of tenant rights and occupancy laws. The expression on my mother's face shifted. She turned back to me with a tight smile. Natalie, come on. You know Vanessa and Trevor don't have anywhere to go. You're just going to throw them out with no warning. I stayed quiet for a moment, letting the weight of the situation settle. Then I answered carefully. I'm honoring my lease. Elijah and Isabella are my tenants. They're moving in today. Vanessa had crossed her arms and was standing off to the side, still refusing to help Trevor with any of the packing. This is unbelievable, she said loud enough for everyone to hear. You really care more about a contract than your own family. I ignored her and walked Elijah and Isabella back to the door. If you'd like to wait in the lobby, I said gently, this should be wrapped up soon. I'll come get you once the apartment is ready." Elijah nodded and placed a hand lightly on Isabella's back as they stepped out. I closed the door and turned around to face my mother and sister. "I'm not changing my mind," I said. "They signed a lease. The movers are coming. You shouldn't have promised them something that wasn't yours to give." My mother frowned. "I had a key. That should count for something." Mr. Peters was still standing nearby and spoke again calmly. "Possession of a key doesn't grant legal access or authority. Only the property owner can determine who resides here." That seemed to finally land. My mother's expression shifted from confidence to something quieter. She stepped back and looked at Vanessa, who was now angrily shoving toiletries into a duffel bag. Trevor moved from room to room, gathering the rest of their things, not saying much. My mother kept pacing every few minutes, glancing at me with a look that hovered somewhere between disbelief and disapproval. "I just never thought you'd be this cold," she muttered. "After everything this family has done for you." I didn't answer right away. I waited as Trevor zipped up the last suitcase and Vanessa slammed the bathroom door behind her. "What exactly has the family done for me, Mom?" I asked quietly. "I paid for college myself. I worked 2 jobs to save for this apartment. I've never asked for anything." My mother didn't respond. Her gaze dropped to the floor. Vanessa came out of the bathroom holding a handful of makeup and a towel. She stared at me like I had betrayed her. "You've always had everything. The grades, the job, your perfect little apartment. Some of us haven't had it so easy." I took a breath. "You had a fully paid education. You've always had help, and now you tried to take something that isn't yours." Vanessa's face twisted, and for a second I saw something like tears in her eyes. "We gave up our lease. Where are we even supposed to go?" Her voice cracked as she said it. I didn't answer right away. I had seen her cry before many times, and each time it had ended with my mother asking me to make some sacrifice to make things easier for Vanessa. But I looked over at Trevor, who had been quietly gathering bags this entire time. "You could stay with friends," I said finally. "Or get a hotel until you find something else." Vanessa looked disgusted. "A hotel we're trying to save for our wedding. You know how expensive things are." She turned to Trevor. "This is ridiculous." Trevor glanced at me, then said quietly, "Rick said we could stay at his place for a few days if we need to." "Rick lives with 3 other people in a 1-bedroom, she snapped. "That's not an option." He didn't argue, just kept packing. My mother stepped toward me. "Maybe your tenants could wait a week or 2, just until they find something else. I'm sure they'd understand." I didn't respond. Another knock at the door broke the silence. Mr. Peters returned with a security guard. He kept his tone polite but firm. Some neighbors called about raised voices, just checking to make sure everything is under control. I looked over at Vanessa and Trevor, then back at him. "They're just leaving now." He nodded. "We can wait here until they're fully out if you'd like." The presence of the guard changed the room. Vanessa looked over, then back at me, her eyes wide. Her voice dropped. "You'd really do this call in security over your own sister?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Trevor took one last box to the door, then turned around. "Let's go," he said. "We'll figure something out." For a long moment, Vanessa didn't move. She just stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight. Then she picked up her purse and walked toward the door. "I hope your apartment's worth all this," she said. As they stepped into the hallway, my mother lingered. "They really don't have anywhere else to go," she said softly. "Can't you help them just a little?" I watched Trevor load their bags into the elevator. Then I nodded. "I'll cover 3 nights in a hotel," I said. "That should give them time to make other arrangements." My mother blinked. "You will?" I nodded. "But don't offer my home to anyone again without asking." She didn't answer. Vanessa and Trevor didn't say goodbye. Back inside, I took a breath and texted Elijah and Isabella to come back up. When they arrived, I greeted them with a smile and handed them the keys. "The apartment is yours," I said. "No more surprises." By the time Vanessa and Trevor walked out of the building, I could feel the pressure finally start to lift. Elijah and Isabella followed me through the apartment as I pointed out how to work the thermostat and where to find the circuit breaker. They asked a few polite questions about the neighborhood, and I did my best to keep my answers steady. When I handed them the keys, Isabella looked at me and said, "We're grateful you stood your ground. This place already feels like home." I nodded and thanked them, then gathered my bag and walked out. Back at Zoe's, I sat quietly in her living room, the soft hum of the dishwasher filling the silence. She didn't ask for details. She just handed me a cup of tea and sat beside me, flipping through a magazine as if nothing unusual had happened. I was grateful for that. The quiet gave me space to think through everything, how fast it had all escalated, how close I'd come to losing something I had worked years to build. The next day, I called the hotel I'd booked for Vanessa and Trevor and confirmed the check-in. I texted Trevor the details along with the contact info for a short-term rental agent I trusted. His reply came quickly. "Thanks again for helping. We'll figure it out from here." No message from Vanessa. 2 days later, I got a call from my dad in Arizona. We don't talk often, but we've always stayed loosely in touch. He'd heard from my mother and wanted to know if everything was okay. "She told me what happened," he said after a pause. "Said she may have overstepped." I leaned against the kitchen counter and took a deep breath. "She offered my apartment without asking. I had tenants ready to move in. It turned into a mess." He didn't say much at first. Then he told me a story I hadn't heard before, how after their divorce, my mother had once offered to lend out his car to a neighbor while he was away on business. "It's always been like that with her," he said quietly. "She assumes if someone in the family has something, it's fair game." I didn't respond right away, just listened to the sound of his breath on the line. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I checked my email and saw a message from Trevor. The subject line was simple, about the wedding. I opened it slowly. He wrote that they had decided to postpone the ceremony. He said the apartment incident had brought up deeper issues in their relationship, ones they hadn't fully acknowledged before. They were starting counseling. He thanked me again for how I handled the situation and said he was sorry it had come at my expense. I sat with that email for a while. Then I typed a short reply, wishing them well and hoping counseling would help. I didn't mention Vanessa by name. The next few days passed quietly. My mother called, though not to argue. Her tone was different now, softer. She asked how work was going. She wanted to know how I liked Zoe's place. At one point she even said, "I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I've been thinking about everything. I might have made some mistakes." I didn't interrupt. I let her talk. She invited me to dinner, just the two of us. That alone was unusual. Growing up, it was rare for her to do anything without Vanessa by her side. We met at a small Italian place near the lake. She was already seated when I arrived, looking a little nervous. She folded her napkin 3 times before she even picked up the menu. "I've been thinking about how I've handled things," she said once we'd ordered, "especially between you and Vanessa." I waited. I always thought I was doing what was best. "She needed more help. You were always so capable. But I can see now that I wasn't being fair." I watched her carefully. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't excusing anything. I nodded slowly. That's what it felt like. For a long time. She looked down, then back at me. "I want to do better." I believed her, or at least I believed that she meant it in that moment. Back at Zoe's, I told her about the dinner. She listened quietly, then said, "That sounds like progress." I nodded. "It does. I'm just not sure how long it'll last." "You don't have to be sure," she said. "You just have to be honest about where your line is." The following morning, I stopped by the apartment building to pick up some mail and check on a few things. The doorman waved me through, and I took the elevator to the 8th floor. I knocked once before opening the door with the spare key. Isabella greeted me with a smile. "Come in," she said. "Everything has been great so far." They'd already added a few personal touches, framed photos on the side table, a cozy throw blanket over the arm of the couch. It felt lived in, but still cared for. I walked through the space quietly, checking the smoke detectors and jotting down a note about a flickering light in the hallway. As I headed toward the door, Isabella followed me. "Thank you again," she said. "The way you handled that whole situation, it meant a lot. To us both." Back on the street, I pulled out my phone and texted Trevor a brief message. "Hope things are settling down. Let me know if you need that rental agent contact again." A few minutes later, he replied, "We're okay. Thanks for checking in." The breeze coming off the lake was cool, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could really exhale. I had stood my ground. I had made space for myself without guilt or apology. And slowly, things were beginning to shift. The following weekend, I sat across from Zoe in her kitchen while she diced bell peppers for a stir-fry. The conversation drifted from work to errands to how quiet things had been since the apartment blow-up. She didn't ask for updates, and I didn't offer any, but just before she turned off the stove, she looked over and said, "You know, you handled that whole situation better than I think I would have." I smiled, unsure how to respond. The past week had been quieter, yes, but something underneath it all still felt unfinished. That night, I reread Trevor's email and noticed something I hadn't caught before. His words hinted at reflection, at wanting change. But Vanessa's name never came up again, not directly. I wondered if she had read the message, or if he had written it entirely on his own. My phone buzzed as I was brushing my teeth. It was a text from my mother. "Dinner tomorrow night. Just the three of us." I stared at the message for a while, then replied, "Sure." Where and when we met at a small restaurant halfway between my place and hers. Vanessa was already seated when I arrived. She didn't stand up when I got to the table. My mother gestured to the seat across from them. "Thanks for coming," she said. Vanessa barely looked at me. The waitress came and took our orders, and we sat in awkward silence until the salads arrived. My mother cleared her throat. "Vanessa has something to say." Vanessa glanced up, then back down at her water glass. "I'm still upset," she said. "But Trevor says I owe you an apology." "So, I'm sorry we stayed in your apartment without asking. It wasn't warm. It wasn't gracious, but it was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from her." I nodded once. "Thanks for saying that." My mother jumped in. "I think this whole thing was just a misunderstanding. I didn't correct her. I just let her talk." She continued, "We all make assumptions sometimes. Maybe next time we'll all ask first, before making decisions that affect each other." Vanessa didn't comment. She picked at her food while my mother kept trying to smooth the edges. After dinner, as we stood outside waiting for our rides, Vanessa looked over. "We're staying with Rick this week. Trevor says we should look for a short-term lease." I nodded. "There's a good agency in Logan Square. I sent Trevor the contact." She didn't say thank you, but she didn't argue either. As she stepped toward the curb, she turned back slightly. "We'll figure something out." The next morning, I got a message from Mr. Peters, letting me know that Elijah and Isabella had dropped off a small thank you note at the front desk. I stopped by the building on my way to a client meeting. The envelope was simple, with my name written neatly on the front. Inside was a card with a photo of them sitting on the couch holding glasses of sparkling cider. The message read, "Thank you for making space for us. This apartment already feels like home." I tucked the card into my planner and headed out into the afternoon light. That afternoon, I got a call from my mother. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, "about always favoring Vanessa. I don't know if I meant to, but maybe I did. I waited. You were always so self-sufficient," she said. "It never occurred to me that you needed the same kind of support. I let her talk. She wasn't defensive, just quiet, thoughtful. I'm not asking for anything, I said. I just needed space to make my own choices, and to not have those choices undone without warning. She sighed. I understand. I'm trying to. It was the first time in years that I didn't feel like I had to explain myself to be heard. We ended the call with a simple, talk soon. That weekend, Zoe and I went to the farmer's market. As we walked between stalls, she asked if I'd given any thought to what I'd do after the lease ended. You planning to move back into your apartment or keep renting it out? I hadn't decided yet. But something had shifted. I'd started reading about investment properties and was researching neighborhoods where long-term rentals were in demand. Maybe I'll buy another place, I said. One just for income. Zoe raised her eyebrows. Look at you. I shrugged, just thinking ahead. Later that night, I sat on the balcony outside Zoe's condo and looked out over the lights of the city. My apartment was only a few miles away, but it felt like another chapter now. One that had closed or at least turned a page. I thought about the past few weeks, how something so simple had spiraled so far, and yet how that spiral had brought things to the surface that had been buried for years. When I checked my phone, there was another message from Trevor. Counseling starts Tuesday. Vanessa isn't thrilled, but she agreed to try. I typed back, wishing you both the best. And I meant it. The following week passed quietly, almost too quietly. I kept busy at work, met with a few new clients, and spent evenings at Zoe's condo, scrolling through listings of small investment properties just to see what was out there. It had become a habit now, checking market trends, comparing rental yields, reading about landlord tax strategies. Not because I had made a decision yet, but because it felt good to think forward instead of backward. On Wednesday afternoon, I stopped by the apartment building again. I had a folder of documents for Elijah and Isabella, copies of the appliance warranties, some updated building notices, and a new contact list for maintenance staff. When I knocked, Isabella opened the door right away. She smiled and stepped aside to let me in. "You've got perfect timing," she said. Elijah just made coffee. The apartment looked different now in the best way. The curtains had been changed out for pale blue ones, and a small potted plant sat in the center of the dining table. There were framed pictures on the wall near the kitchen. Nothing fancy, just snapshots of the two of them at the lake or with friends. It was still my place, but it was clearly becoming theirs too. We sat in the living room for a few minutes while I walked them through the paperwork. Elijah thanked me for being so organized. Isabella offered me coffee again, and I finally accepted. "You know," she said as she handed me the cup, "this place really feels like home already. I don't think we've ever settled into a place this fast." I smiled and nodded. "I'm glad. You've made it your own without changing the things that matter." We chatted for a bit longer, and as I stood to leave, Isabella walked me to the door. "I hope things with your family are better," she said gently. "That must have been hard." I paused, then nodded. "Things are shifting, slowly." That night, Zoe and I shared takeout on the couch. She noticed I was quieter than usual. "What's going on?" she asked. I told her about the visit with Elijah and Isabella. I didn't expect to feel anything when I walked in, I said. But I did. "Good or bad?" she asked. "Both," I said. "Good because they're clearly happy. Bad because—" It reminded me how close I came to losing all of it. Zoe leaned back and looked at me. "But you didn't. You stood your ground." I nodded. "Yeah, I did." On Friday, I got a message from my mother. She wanted to meet again, just the two of us. We met at a quiet diner on the south side, one we hadn't visited since I was in high school. She was already seated, 2 mugs of coffee waiting. "I've been thinking," she said as soon as I sat down, "about what you said, about how you've always had to carry things on your own." She paused to stir cream into her cup. "I always thought I was doing what made sense. Vanessa needed help. You didn't. But maybe that wasn't fair." I listened without interrupting. I should have supported you more, not just when it was easy, but when it was uncomfortable. And I definitely shouldn't have given them your key. I took a sip of coffee and nodded. That meant a lot to hear, I said quietly. It's not just about the apartment. It's about how decisions have always been made around me instead of with me. She looked up and met my eyes. I want to do better. I can't change everything overnight, but I want to start. We talked for almost an hour. Nothing dramatic, just small things, little moments where she could have asked instead of assumed. She didn't blame me. She didn't shift the subject to Vanessa. And for the first time, it felt like we were having a conversation as two adults, not as mother and daughter locked in old patterns. The next day, I had a voicemail from Trevor. His tone was even, calm. I just wanted to say thank you again, he said. Counseling's been tough, but it's making us think about things we used to avoid. I don't know where this leads, but we're trying. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the building again, not for any official reason, just to drop off a box of extra light bulbs and a few kitchen items I'd forgotten in the upper cabinet. Elijah was at work, but Isabella buzzed me in right away. As we stood in the kitchen, she looked over and said, "You seem different than the first time we met." I tilted my head. How so? She smiled, more grounded, like you're not carrying everything on your own anymore. I thanked her and headed out. As I waited at the elevator, I looked down the hallway toward my old front door. It felt strange knowing I wouldn't be walking back through it for a while, and yet it didn't feel like something I'd lost, just something I'd shared. That evening, Zoe and I sat on the balcony watching the sun drop behind the skyline. You know, I said, I think I might look into buying another place, something small, maybe in a neighborhood that's still growing. She raised an eyebrow. Is this the same Natalie who used to double-check her budget before buying a new toaster? I laughed. I've just learned that protecting what's mine doesn't mean keeping it all to myself. It means knowing what it's worth. She didn't say anything right away. Then she nodded. Sounds like someone who's finally starting to build a life that works for her. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The morning of the barbecue, I arrived early with Zoe. She helped carry the folding chairs out to the lawn while I double-checked the food orders and made sure the speaker system was working. It wasn't a huge gathering, maybe 30 people total, but it felt like a celebration not just of summer, but of something steadier. A turning point. Elijah and Isabella brought a cooler filled with drinks and a peach cobbler that Isabella swore was store-bought but disguised. She handed it to me with a grin. "Just don't tell anyone," she whispered. Elijah gave me a quick side hug and said, "Feels good to be on this side of things." Later, my mother arrived with a pasta salad and a small bouquet of sunflowers. I wasn't expecting that. She hugged me gently and said, "These are for you. I saw them and thought they'd look nice on your table." I thanked her and took the flowers to the kitchen, arranging them in an old glass pitcher I'd kept from the apartment. Vanessa and Trevor showed up close to noon. He helped carry in a tray of ribs while Vanessa wandered to the backyard where the grill was already going. Zoe watched them from the patio door and leaned toward me. "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah. I think so." I kept things moving, refilling drinks, passing around napkins, checking the speaker volume. Every once in a while, someone pulled me aside to say how beautiful the space looked, or how happy I seemed. Each time I smiled and thanked them, then moved on to the next task. By the time everyone had eaten, and the first round of lemonade pitchers were empty, Elijah stepped forward with his phone in hand. "Natalie," he said, raising his voice just enough for everyone to hear. We wanted to say something. I turned from the kitchen window and saw that he and Isabella had gathered by the grill, their arms linked. Isabella looked a little nervous, but she nodded as Elijah continued. When we moved into the apartment, we didn't know what to expect. We were in a tough place, and honestly, we were used to landlords treating us like problems. But you gave us more than a lease. He paused and looked around. You treated us like neighbors, like people worth believing in. And that changed things for us. Isabella added. "We know the past few months haven't been easy for you, but we wanted you to know we're grateful, not just for the apartment, but for the way you held on to it, even when things got complicated." A few people clapped. My mother was standing near the back, her hand on her chest, eyes misty. Vanessa glanced at her, then looked away. Trevor gave a small nod. Elijah stepped forward again and handed me a small envelope. Just something we wanted to give back. I opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten card and a check, not a huge amount, but enough to make me blink twice. "We started saving," Isabella said quietly. "We know you never asked for anything extra, but we wanted to put this toward your next step, whatever that looks like." I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at them, then back down at the card. Finally, I nodded. "Thank you," I said. "This means more than you know." The rest of the afternoon passed like a long exhale. People played lawn games. Someone started a playlist with old Motown hits. My mother helped Vanessa carry dessert trays outside, and I saw the two of them talking quietly under the awning. I didn't press. Whatever the topic was, it didn't belong to me. Later, while Zoe and I were folding up the extra chairs, my mother came over with a plastic container. "I put some pasta salad aside for you," she said. "I know you barely ate with all the running around." I took it and smiled. "Thanks, Mom." She hesitated, then asked, "Would you walk with me for a minute?" We stepped down the side path away from the voices and music. "I wanted to say something before the day ended," she said. "You've handled all of this with more grace than I ever could have." I looked over but didn't speak. She went on, "It's hard for me to admit when I've been wrong, but I see it now. The way we made decisions, the way we let certain patterns take root." She stopped walking and turned to me. "You changed that. Quietly, firmly, without yelling, without slamming doors. That's not weakness, that's strength." I felt something shift then, not a sudden jolt, but a steady click into place. I didn't respond with a speech. I just nodded, and we kept walking. That evening, after everyone had gone and the yard was quiet again, I sat on the patio with Zoe. The last of the paper lanterns were still glowing faintly. "You ever think this would be where you ended up?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not in a million years." She leaned back in her chair. "But it fits you. This house, this life, you built it, even when they tried to take it." I didn't say anything for a while, just let the breeze carry the last of the music away. Then I said, "It's funny. I used to think stability meant never changing anything. But maybe it just means knowing who you are when everything else does change." Zoe smiled. "I think you just described growing up." I looked out at the yard, folding tables, half-emptied lights still warm in the trees. Tomorrow I'd clean it all up. But for now, I let myself breathe. Really breathe. A week after the barbecue, I got a call from a woman named Carrie. She introduced herself as a representative from a local housing nonprofit. "We've received a nomination," she said, "for a Community Recognition Award. Your tenants, Elijah and Isabella, put your name forward." I sat there for a second, unsure what to say. She continued, "It's for people who've gone out of their way to preserve dignity and stability for others, even when it meant sacrificing their own comfort." The award ceremony wasn't a big production, just a small gathering at the library downtown. Zoe came with me, and so did Isabella, who brought her mother. Carrie gave a short speech about housing justice and kindness, then called my name. As I walked up, I saw Elijah smiling from the second row, holding a little bouquet of hand-picked flowers. They handed me a plaque and took a photo. I didn't feel like someone who had done anything extraordinary. I just felt like someone who finally stopped waiting to be handed respect and started creating a life rooted in it. After the ceremony, my mother called. She'd read the local news article about the award and said I didn't realize everything you were juggling back then. "I thought I knew you, but now I see I didn't." Her voice cracked a little. You deserved better from all of us." I didn't respond right away, but eventually I said, "It's not about who failed me. It's about what I chose to carry forward and what I chose to leave behind." Trevor and Vanessa invited me to dinner not long after. We sat in their backyard, and for once the conversation wasn't tight or defensive. Vanessa asked about my garden, and Trevor offered to help paint the shed when fall rolled around. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I still have days where I feel the weight of everything, years of silence, of playing peacemaker, of being the one who made things work. But now I know the difference between keeping the peace and keeping my peace, and I choose the latter. The apartment is no longer just a building. It's a home for me, for others, for the version of myself that needed proof she could stand her ground without burning it all down. Zoe told me recently, "You taught me something you know. That quiet strength doesn't always need applause. Sometimes it just needs to be lived." She was right. If you've ever been told you were too quiet, too soft, too willing to let things slide, maybe what you really are is strong in ways others can't see. And maybe the life you build piece by piece will be more solid than anything they tried to take from you. Thanks for listening. If this story meant something to you, feel free to share it with someone who might need to hear it too.